have a first on episode 140 of The Next Best Bet. I'm Jake Higgins with Brett Levy as always, and we're going to have your picks going into the weekend of Thursday's NHL, NBA, MLB games. We also have a hint of some football we get to talk about, but Brett, before we get to that, last episode, 139, we're going to do a recap on how we did, and we have the very first pick of the pod that was a push. It was voided. The game did not happen. So my San Diego, Colorado over 10.5 pick of the pod is a no play. So we have a 1.5 game back trail now because you lost. You had a 2-game lead, but since you lost, it's a 1.5 game lead now.
I know, Higgins, you did it, man. I mean, you and I have been finding COVID pushes, we've been finding weather pushes, and you finally did it. You found one in a pick of a pod, Levy lock. So, mazel tov, congratulations. That's like harder than winning a bet, I think. But yeah, it was not my best day on the Levy lock. The Blazers. I picked a -12 Higgins. They won by 11, so that one stung a little bit. I did have 2 other wins, so it eased the pain a little bit. But 2-2 on the week, can't really complain.
But let's talk about your units on the year, Brett, because by going 2-2, that Angels moneyline pick was +110, so you went from being 12.04 units up on the year to 12.05 units up on the year. There we go. Getting that little extra 1 cent, that 0.01 where we can here or there. It's the little things that make us smile, right?
It is the little things, Higgins. What a big swing in the books there.
Let's jump into some Beginners Boulevard right now, Brett. We're talking about the opening lines, and we have a taste of some opening lines, but typically you will see lines move based off where the public money is, based off of news that happens leading up to those games, things of that nature. But these lines, they have to start somewhere. They have to open at a certain number. And that's what we're talking about, is the opening line, where the sportsbook first lays out these wagers.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have a strong belief in something to happen, Higgins, sometimes you can find a little edge with the opening line. It may not be as sharp because, again, the books have to prepare and save themselves from exposure, Higgins. So the line is not always quote unquote accurate, right? Like if the Cowboys are playing, there may be an extra point or a half point favoring the Cowboys, and you might be able to take advantage of that from the opening line.
And a lot of the lines that you and I talk about, especially for something like the NBA or the MLB, where we are always only talking about the next day's available lines, you and I are pretty much wagering on the opening lines for the next day's actions. And while there is some risk because you can see a probable starter that ends up getting changed or injuries have a person sit out of a lineup, you can also find some early great value as well before the public money turns the tides a little bit. But Brett, the opening lines that we got on Wednesday that kind of shook the sports world a little bit is we already have some opening lines for week 1 of the NFL season. Now, we have all 16 games, Brett. I'm not making a pick out all the way in May, are you?
No, I'm not going to make a pick, but obviously there were some games that caught my eye. I think the one that caught everyone's eye, Higgins, Packers versus Saints. Saints currently -1, so they're a 1-point favorite, but that is a line, Higgins, that there could be a lot of movement depending on what happens over the next few months. Who's going to be the starting quarterback for the Packers? Who's going to be the starting quarterback for the Saints? So
It's a lot up in the air there.
that is quite an aggressive early line, and I get it. The sports books want to draw in as much user interaction as possible. So the schedule was released. Let's put a line out, and I think -1 is honestly pretty fair, Higgins, because Who knows who is playing quarterback on either side in that game?
I think most of these lines are very fair considering none of them are larger than a touchdown this far out, obviously. I think that would be insane to put above a 7 point spread. But we do have something that's a 6.5 point spread, like the Rams hosting the Bears in week one. What caught my eye, Brett, is how heavily favored the books made the home teams throughout this slate. 11 of the 16 games have the home team being favored. One of those intrigues me. It's the Jacksonville Jaguars going to see the Houston Texans. Now, the Texans have been covered in controversy with the news swirling around Deshaun Watson. Does he play? Is he going to be suspended? Is he going to be on the roster? Is he going to hold out and sit out from being on the Texans? There's way too many questions compared to the Jaguars, who will have Trevor Lawrence under center, will have Tim Tebow at tight end. So Jacksonville, even though they were the number one pick, the worst team in the NFL last year, they are going to be a week one favorite. That's a little bit surprising to me, and there could be some value if this whole Deshaun Watson story gets some clarity and if he ends up being available for week one.
Yeah, week one favorite on the road in Houston. Definitely, I think, to your point, I think the Deshaun Watson thing's playing into that line a little bit. And I also think, what the Texans have done as a whole. Like, we had this discussion actually on the show I work on during the day, Higgins. I'll bring it up here because it's a really interesting point. Um, let's all just agree that, if Deshaun Watson is not on the field, Laramie Tunsil is probably the most valuable Houston Texan. Who
Yes,
is the
now especially, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it's Laramie Tunsil, right? Who's the second most valuable Houston Texan? Like,
Well, there were some names that should have been on that list, but now, as we have seen this offseason progress, they are no longer Texans anymore. So you're right. After Tunsil, there is quite the fall off.
yeah, it's really shocking when you put it in that perspective. Everyone's like, "Oh, Deshaun Watson, Tunsil, they can't be that bad." And then you're like, "Wait a second. Who am I afraid of on this off? Like maybe Brandon Cooks? Like
That was my guess. Was Brandon
yeah.
Cooks is probably the number two behind Laramie Tunsil in terms of the big name for the Houston Texans,
Yeesh.
excluding Watson if Watson's not on the roster for week one.
Yeesh. Yeesh.
But Brett, let's go back to that Bears Rams game I brought up real quickly, because the Rams 6.5 point favorites. I know they're at home, but they have a new quarterback with Matthew Stafford, who, although he was a gunslinger in Detroit, and Detroit's had its own mess of problems, Stafford was in Detroit for a lot of those problems and at least should take some accountability for it. You have the unknown factor of the Justin Fields story with the Chicago Bears. Is there a week one road win for the Chicago Bears with Justin Fields? I don't know, but nearly at a full touchdown, the largest spread that we see on these opening lines, that's surprising for me with the two teams with quarterback questions that we haven't seen them on the field with those teams yet.
Yeah, I kind of I don't even know really what I think is going to happen in that game. I like to believe Justin Fields is going to be out there, but throwing him against that defense with Ramsey and Donald and Brockers,
It's a very good point.
I mean, that's a really good defense, Higgins, for your first NFL game to go up against. So I, I would lean Rams on that, and I think that's part of the reason the spread's so big is because the Rams defense, maybe not be the most solid all 17 weeks. They have some true difference makers on that side of the ball, and that's enough to kind of scare me away from the Bears week one. That's not to say I don't believe in Justin Fields and his long term career in the NFL. Just first NFL start, I'd rather be, let's say, the Jets going up against the Panthers defense. That seems a little more reasonable.
And there is Andy Dalton, who was signed to a decently sized contract by the Bears in the offseason. So maybe there isn't going to be that rush to get Justin Fields out in week one, especially against a defense as strong as the Rams, like you said. Last thing about the NFL, Brett, before we get into our picks, though. Your Jets and the Panthers, we get to see Darnold face off against his old team right out the gate in week one. It's a little bit of an interesting story, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I kind of hinted at this one. I think it's a pretty good spot for Zach Wilson to get his first start. I mean, Matt Rule was a college coach while Zach Wilson was still in college. And the Panthers defense is very young. In fact, last year in the draft, Higgins, all of their draft picks were defensive picks. This year they went defensive heavy again, but they did get Sam Darnold a few weapons. So it'll be nice. I'm rooting for Sam to play well. I want him to play well. I'd like to think that he is more talented than what he was able to show in New York. I root for players all the time, Higgins. I'm very pro player. So I like to think that the Jets probably did him a little bit of a disservice. But that being said, I will be rooting for my New York Jets. I'll be rooting for the Zach Wilson era to start off strong. And, you know, if Sam doesn't win his first game in Carolina, I won't be crying.
Well, let's jump into our baseball, talk about some games that are a little bit closer in the future, like on Thursday compared to in September, Brett. We have a good slate of games. It was actually, I had a much harder time picking from the MLB slate compared to our NHL and NBA slate that we're going to get into in a little bit, Brett. Partly because I like the quality of these baseball lines a lot better. Those lines in the NBA and the NHL, it was hard to pick those for a very different reason that we'll get into. But these MLB lines, there's some interesting games. Starting off with an NL Central matchup between the Cardinals and the Brewers. Now, this is going to be Corbin Burns coming back off of an IL stint. We think it was COVID-19. He's facing off against Jack Flaherty with the St. Louis Cardinals coming to town. Flaherty is already 6-0 on the season, Brett. So with Burns coming off of this bed rest, kind of like that, I'm going to ride with the hot hand of Flaherty, who hasn't been on the IL yet. Take the Cardinals plus 105 on their road trip up to Milwaukee here.
It's interesting, Higgins. Corbin Burns has been amazing on the mound this year. So, it was a great stat you gave about Jack Flaherty. For me, this was a stay away game. These are two, in my mind, top tier pitchers in the majors right now. Definitely in the NL. So I will have more fun probably scoreboard watching this one, seeing if anyone has a no going throughout this one, than actually betting it. But I like that Flaherty's undefeated, a pitcher coming off, the IL for undisclosed reasons, right? So, yeah, I think everything you said is fair and definitely plausible for sure, Higgins.
Yeah, Flaherty, 7 appearances. They've won all 7 games, the Cardinals have. Flaherty has been given credit for 6 of those wins. The Cardinals on the road as well, they're also 10-6 on the road here. So I like this visit in an NL Central rivalry like this, especially against someone like Corbin Burns, who, although he has had this phenomenal start in his 5 appearances so far this season, the Brewers are 2-3. Corbin Burns personally is 2-2.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's been fantastic, just himself, no doubt about it. But you know who was fantastic in his last start, Higgins? My guy who had a temporary Hulk tattoo on his arm because his son asked him to put it on, and he was like, "Sure, I'll do that." And then he went out and threw a no Higgins. Wade Miley takes the mound, his first game after the no hitter. He's facing Chichi Gonzalez of the Colorado Rockies. The game's in Coors, so the over-under is set at 10. I expect there to be runs scored. I do not expect a no-hitter from Wayne Miley, but I do expect the Hulk tattoo. I will say, why would you go out without it? I don't know.
Hey, baseball superstitions run extremely deep. Why not at least continue that for one more game? I agree. Brett, I'm surprised though the no hangover isn't having you stay away. I typically stay away from those games, or I'll bet against the guy that just threw the no because I'm not never sure how well their arm does off of the normal rest that they get after such a workload. But An interesting pick. They are still favored in Colorado.
Yeah, I like you said, Higgins. I'm backing the Cincinnati Reds on the money line. I'm backing Wade Miley, and it's pretty much the auto fade of Chichi Gonzalez. I hate to, hate on guys, right? Like I want to be pro player, but Chichi has a 5.97 ERA, a
Oof.
WHIP over 1.57. He's walked 10,
Oof.
only struck out 15,
Eesh.
surrendered 35 hits. With all due respect to Chichi Gonzalez, he is a great baseball player. You do not make it to the major leagues without being a great baseball player. In terms of major league starting pitchers, he is probably towards the bottom of that list, unfortunately. So it's really, it's tough to pitch in Colorado. Anything could happen for any pitcher. I'm sure Chi pitches there a lot, which might inflate that ERA a little bit, but I can't back a guy with those numbers. Wade Miley has been fantastic this year. He capped it off with a no-no in his last start. You're right. His arm may be a little tired. Maybe he can't go as long, but I'm not backing Chichi Gonzalez. Is pretty much where I stand.
And while the Rockies are leading 2-1 over the Padres as we're recording this on Wednesday night, the Rockies also are trying to break a 4-game losing streak currently, Brett. So going into that game tomorrow could mean a lot more like that if they end up losing to the Padres tonight. Or they could be really exhausted from the end of a brutal series against the Padres in a game they could potentially win on Wednesday if they end up giving it up. We'll see how that goes. I like that pick, Brett. Staying on the West Coast, though, I'm going to be jumping up to Seattle. We have the Indians facing off against the Mariners, where we have Zach Plesac on the mound for Cleveland, facing off against a young Logan Gilbert who just got called up for the Seattle Mariners. He's one of a young nucleus of pitchers that Seattle's going to be calling up in the next couple of weeks, months for this year, but over the next few years, they're really supposed to be the young nucleus that they're going to build around in their pitching staff. And you know what? I don't know if the Mariners necessarily win this game, if Gilbert's going to escape with a win, but I do like Seattle at +1.5 at home at only -125 odds, Brett, because Seattle is still the best team in the league against the run line. They're tied with the St. Louis Cardinals and the San Francisco Giants at 23-13 going into Wednesday's games. That's a 63.9 win percentage against the run line. So I'm taking Seattle as the home dogs here. It seems like a natural logic to me in a sense.
Yeah, I'm interested in this game because it's in Seattle with both young players. Higgins, you mentioned Logan Gilbert, Jared Kelenic, the number 3 overall prospect in all of Major League Baseball, is also coming up. I don't know if he'll be in the lineup for sure on Thursday, but I would bet it. You know what I mean,
Yeah.
Higgins? Like you're not calling up this kid not to put him in the lineup. So, it's not like Logan Gilbert where we know they're calling him up to start, but you could almost write it in Sharpie. So there's gonna be a lot of excitement in that ballpark tomorrow with the Mariners. So I could definitely see them stealing a win here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're going to necessarily take the win, but the +1.5 run line I think is a fantastic value right now at -125 on Wednesday night. If that's still there on Thursday, I would continue to grab that as well until it gets down to probably a -140, 150, and then it's not really necessarily worth it just for the value of return. But -125 is a home dog. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that I totally agree. Last game we're gonna find ourselves on, Higgins. I'm gonna find myself on Marlins Diamondbacks. Trevor Rogers is on the mound for the Marlins. He's been unbelievable this year. 50 strikeouts, Higgins, and 38 innings pitched with a sub 2 ERA at 1.89. Merrill Kelly, on the other hand, 5.40 ERA. Only 30 strikeouts in 38 innings. This is a pitcher mismatch, Higgins, and I am getting even money Minus 105 both ways on the money line here. So the book's taking a little bit of juice, Higgins, but that's just they didn't want to put it at even money. Fine, so be it. I get Rodgers pretty much at even money. You take that and you run, sir.
Yeah, the pitching notes and stats that you just mentioned of the differences between Trevor Rogers and Merrill Kelly, I don't really get that money line right there. Maybe first five odds are drastically different than what we're seeing the full nine money line at, but that is really surprising. Because I agree, Trevor Rogers versus Merrill Kelly is absolutely a mismatch on the mound.
Yeah, I think it's tough to run a sports book, Higgins. Like you got to put out a lot of lines, and someone may have been a little bit asleep at this opening line here. I don't know, or maybe they know something I don't know. Right? Maybe they're smarter than me. I should be careful.
And Brett, just so you know, this is the second of the two series that these two teams are going to be playing this year, so they're going to get their head-to-heads out early. So far, the Miami Marlins, they swept Arizona in Miami, and so far the Diamondbacks are sweeping Miami in Arizona. Those two teams are also playing on Wednesday night as we are recording, Brett. But Miami's winning that one 3-1 currently. So if they hold on to that one in the top of the fourth currently, then would break that streak of the home team winning so far in their regular season series.
Yeah, and kind of a big note for Diamondback fans and all gamblers out there. Zach Gallen was supposed to start the Wednesday night game, but he was a late scratch and he was put on the IL. So it's just something to be alert of. We think Merrill Kelly will be the starting pitcher on Thursday, but obviously they have had to do some shuffling up of their pitching staff over the last 24 hours here.
Definitely something to be aware of. That is a very good point, Brett. We're not out of the woods with our baseball talk yet, Brett, because our moneyline magic drags us back to Tuesday night. The Mets extending a winning streak to 6 against the Orioles. That streak is now 7 after winning again on Wednesday. And Brett, I see the smirk on your face, so would you like to take this one away?
I'm sorry, Higgins. We're just the hottest team in baseball, baby. All it took was one rat or raccoon or swing at Jeff McNeil's face, and boom, we're the hottest team in baseball. You said it. They extended their win streak to 6 with some late inning heroics on Tuesday night, Higgins. We actually extended it one further on Wednesday, so it's at 7 now. But we're talking about Tuesday night for Moneyline Magic. There was not a run scored in this game until the 7th inning, Higgins, when the Orioles took a lead on a sac fly that scored Freddie Galvis. Baltimore would add an insurance run in the top of the 8th, so the Mets were down 2, Higgins. But the Mets were down 2, but I just said we won 7 in a row, so there's a little Moneyline Magic coming.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a hint, hint. And by the way, that insurance run that happened in the top of the 8th for the Orioles was an RBI bunt single by Freddie Galvis. So Galvis scored one in the 7th and then drove one in with a bunt in the 8th. But obviously, this game's not over because in the bottom of the 8th, the Mets responded with a single by Michael Conforto that would drive in a run, cut that lead to 2-1. Heading into the bottom of the 9th, that lead would be the same. The Mets would have their back against the wall, but they'd have back-to-back singles to start off the inning, Brett. So we have runners on first and second. But then what happens? Dominic Smith comes up to bat, right?
Yes, sir. Big Dom Smith. But actually, before that, McCann would strike out. So
Yes, you're right.
there was a little bit of nervousness for Mets fans there as Dom Smith would come to the plate with 2 on, 1 out. But Dom Smith swings just as good a bat as anyone, Higgins, and he would tie things up with a single to right center that would score Pilar from first. More importantly, though, VR would make it to third on a throwing error, putting runners on the corners, Higgins. I'm sorry. PR scored from second. VR got to third from first. My bad. And
Yes, throwing error moved him from second to
yeah,
third,
yeah.
put runners on
I
the
I
corners.
got excited, Higgins. I know how it finished.
You were watching.
But yeah, I mean that throwing error, VR made a heads up play, got into third. That was huge. And then and every Mets fan's new favorite Met, Pat Mazika, the walk-off king, would in his previous game, he walked off on a little dribbler down the third base line. Well, how about for an encore, Higgins? He hits a dribbler down the first base line, scores VR from third for the walk-off single. Pat Mazika loses his second jersey in 4 games. They just keep ripping those things off. I don't think the equipment guy has enough Mazika jerseys for all the walk-off hits they've been doing with him. It's incredible watching this team right now, Higgins. They're such a different baseball team. They're so hot right now. They're on fire. Like, they can do no wrong. They scored 7 off Matt Harvey today, who made his first start at Citi Field in 3 years and some change. So, like, it's just been a wild ride. Mets fans are enjoying it for sure.
They can't make Mazika jerseys fast enough in New York. I am sure that man having 2 walk-off hits in the span of 4 games. He came in as the pinch hitter for Familia, who had essentially got the save in the top of the ninth. Well, the win actually is what he was credited with. A fantastic outing in the top of the ninth there. But Mazika, the Orioles had their infielders on the grass too, playing to send it to extras and get the runner at home. And still, VR was able to make it from third to first. He was running on contact immediately, you could tell.
He made 2 really great base running plays in that ninth inning. Cesar Valdez also, he's kind of a junk ball pitcher for the Orioles. He's not a guy, he's the opposite of most closers. So most closers we see hit that Aroldis Chapman 100, 101, 99, right? Nah, Cesar Valdez, he's like a changeup guy, a curveball guy, a slider guy. So he throws a lot of junk. Mazika, gotta give him a lot of credit, says he's trying to hit both of these balls in the air. He hits 2 of probably the weakest dribblers for walk-offs in a 4-game span anyone in MLB history has ever hit, Higgins. But they count the same, man. They count the same. You just gotta find the space.
Well, you mentioned Valdez not being your stereotypical closer, Brett. I just took a look at the play-by-play of the pitches that he threw in that bottom of the ninth inning. To Mazika, 8 pitches, all changeups. Dominic Smith, 3 pitches, all changeups. McCann, 3 pitches, all changeups. VR, 1 pitch, a changeup. Pilar, he threw a slider and a four-seam fastball, but also he threw 7 other changeups. So this man relied rather heavily on his changeup for the last 20 pitches and was made to pay, obviously. So very good job by the Mets. 7 straight wins now. We'll see how long they can continue that streak.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely who he is, Higgins. He's a junk ball guy, so you gotta live and die with that stuff.
Well, today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate for ad space so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co. And be sure to add our podcast, The Next Best Bet, in the How Did You Hear About Podgo section of the application. Now, Brett, we're not out of the woods yet. We still have some NBA and some NHL to talk about before we get to our Levy lock and pick of the pod. The NBA, though, both of these leagues, they're coming down the bitter stretch, the very end of their regular seasons. It's hard to find some value with some of these games now.
Yeah, the NBA, generally speaking, I'm not betting too much on it at this point in the year. I'm just waiting for the playoffs. May watch some of the bigger games, but I was able to find one spread, I guess, that enticed me, Higgins. I thought the line was too big considering Atlanta on Wednesday night did just clinch their playoffs spot, whatever. I
Hmm.
mean, they were in the 4 seed. I wasn't worried about it, but the fact that it's a back to back and they did clinch the night before, I do think 12.5 is too many points against the Orlando Magic. So I'm going to take Orlando, who, are trying to develop their young talent and will take this opportunity against the playoff team to, push their young players and say, go out there and prove you can beat quality NBA talent. So I don't know if Orlando can cover. I don't know what Atlanta will do with their minutes on Thursday night, but it does not feel like they will be playing everyone enough minutes to cover that 12.5.
I agree. I was looking at some potential parlay options, some money line parlay options with a heavy favorite like the Hawks as the anchor potentially. But after the Hawks clinched their playoff berth on Wednesday, because that's what they were playing for, really. They had already secured at least a play-in spot, but this is a playoff berth spot, so they're not playing in those play-in games that are special this year. I agree. I don't know how seriously they're going to be playing on Thursday night after having just clinched on Wednesday night. I don't know what those minutes are going to look like. So I think that spread is very high, and I think the Orlando Magic is the right play there. Absolutely. I'm I'm kind of staying away from the spreads though on Thursday night though, Brett. I'm going with the Clippers Hornets game, and both of these teams have clinched playoff spots already. I mean, we have the Clippers, who are currently sitting in the 3 spot, could potentially fall. They're jostling with the Nuggets for position right now. And we have the Hornets, who have a play-in berth clinched right now, but they're jostling right now for what seed in those playing games are they're going to be in the East. So this should be a good game. I expect some defense to actually be played. And when you look at how these teams have done in the over-unders on the year, the under is the natural play here. The Clippers are 33, 34, and 2 on the year at hitting their overs. So they hit their unders just a little bit more than they hit their overs. The Charlotte Hornets, however, they're the third best team in the NBA at hitting their unders. They are 38, 30, and 1 at hitting their unders. So I'm going to be taking 224 under 224 because I think there's going to be some actual defense played in this game. Both of these teams actually care about their seeding in the playoffs and care about where they're going to fall in these standings still. So I don't think this is just going to be a throwaway game where everyone's going to be able to score easily.
All right, we'll have to see. I have no feel for that game, Higgins. Too much of it to me relies upon if Paul George and Kawhi are out there, right? For
Mm-hmm.
everything. So I just honestly cannot with any confidence bet on anything with the Clippers until I know that. Like, that could be up until 2 hours before the game, which is crazy. It's it's just those two players impact so much for the LA Clippers offensively, defensively, in terms of who's even getting the ball on offense because that's almost 40 shots between the two of them. So, how many shots are there for Reggie Jackson or Patrick Beverly or any of these other guys, Marcus Morris? So it's just hard to say with certainty, but you laid out the numbers that would certainly indicate the lower is within play. So I would trust the numbers.
Also, looking at the past 10 games for each of these teams, the Clippers have actually been the solid play in taking an under in the past 10 games. The Charlotte Hornets on the season, like I said, they're hitting unders overall on the season more frequently. But in the past 10 games, the Clippers are 8, 1, and 1. The Hornets, they're 5 and 5. However, an over under set at 224, that is the second highest total the second highest points total that either of these teams have had in their past 10 games. So it's a high over under points total. Both of these teams are hitting their unders a little bit more, whether it be on the season or in the past 10 games. I like the play, even though I don't like under, so I'm going to be nail biting coming down to the end, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely gonna be sweating it out.
Before we get out of here, Brett, the NHL, we only have 3 games listed in Oregon on Wednesday night as we
No,
look into Thursday.
we don't have next Tuesday's game out yet. What
No,
is the Oregon doing?
and all of these games, all 3 games are only for Thursday, too. We only have Thursday's games, so I'm not going to be an oracle, predict ahead of the future or anything like that, but Brett, we do have some interesting things going on with the NHL schedule coming up that we'll talk about in a little bit after I give my pick. But in the Western Conference, or in the Western Division, the Kings are visiting the Avalanche. And I'm going to take the Kings plus 1.5 at plus 115 here. Partly because these two teams are playing tonight already. The Avs are destroying the Kings tonight. It's 6-0 at the end of the second period as we're recording this. Makes me think the Avs could potentially either overlook the Kings in the next game, rest some players in the next game as the Avs prepare to actually go on to the playoffs. The Kings will not. But if you look at how these teams have played each other on the year so far, excluding tonight's game, they had played 6 other times this season. 3 of those games, a plus 1.5 would have covered. So it's a 50-50 shot for me. The Avs got their goals out of the way on Wednesday night, so I think on Thursday night it's going to be a little bit of a closer game. Give me the Kings at that plus 115 money, I think.
All right. Yeah, I gotta be honest, Higgins. The NHL right now is just a complete blind spot for me. It's just been all Mets winning streaks and the NBA playoff race, and unfortunately, I only have so many screens. So I wish I could say something about the Kings and Avs, but I would just be an uninformed, wild take that I'd be reading something off a screen. So I'm gonna trust the numbers you laid out. I like your reasoning. I think teams that get blown out always come back with a little more juice the night after. I think that totally makes a ton of sense, Higgins. So all the logic would point to the Kings tomorrow night. I agree with all of it, but it's sports gambling, and if it was that easy, there would not be casinos in a desert. These huge resort casinos in the desert.
Very, very true. But if you look at the ATS data, it also kind of backs up my point here as well. The Avs are the third worst team in the NHL against the puck line so far this season. Now, most of that is because of their play on the road. They're an abysmal 9-19 on the road. But the Avalanche are also 500 at home. They're 13-13 against the puck line at home. So they cover on Wednesday night. Data says they don't cover on Thursday night. Especially when you look at the Kings are actually the fifth or sixth best team against the spread in the NHL. Have a winning record on the road at 14-12. It's going to be 14-13 after tonight. So I expect a rebound game on Thursday. Whether it matters or not for the Kings doesn't play a big part in this to me because both of these teams have really locked up a lot of their playoff and postseason potential right now. I think it's just a back-to-back scenario where it's not going to happen twice.
Right. No, it makes a lot of sense. But you mentioned that something kind of crazy is happening, Higgins, and I think it's absolutely insane that the NHL playoffs are starting, and Vancouver is just going to be playing until what, next Tuesday, Higgins? Like,
Next Wednesday.
oh, okay, yeah, Wednesday. So, I mean, what I know it's because of COVID-19. The Canucks had a 3 week pause. They had a serious COVID outbreak amongst the team, but that just seems insane. Like, wouldn't you just delay the postseason a few days, or try and squeeze these games in, or say, hey, our playoffs are kind of set here. We don't even need to really play these games.
Yeah, so looking at the remaining NHL schedule as I look at it on ESPN right now, we have 3 games on Thursday, regular season games, 1 regular season game on Friday. That's between Toronto and Winnipeg. Most of these games are North games, by the way, that are still left. Most of these are Canadian games that are left. Then on Saturday, we have one regular season game between the Vancouver Canucks in Edmonton. But then we also have the beginning of the NHL playoffs with the Boston Bruins facing off against the Washington Capitals in the first round of the Eastern Division playoffs. Sunday, Vancouver hosts Calgary. And then, oh, I'm sorry, you were right. It is Tuesday is the final game. Calgary plays again in Vancouver to end the NHL regular season. But
On
it's
the
so
fourth day
strange.
of the NHL playoffs, the NHL season finally ends. I,
By the way, we have no other playoff scheduling besides this one Bruins Capitals game.
I just don't know what we're doing here, Higgins. Like,
What are we doing?
how did no one call the NHL and was like, hey, this is really confusing. Like, maybe we should do it a different way. Yeah, you summed it up best. We have one playoff game scheduled. We got 3 regular season games going on after the playoffs start. The playoffs are set. The NHL, man, just a wild way to finish off your season here. Probably the most confusing end to a season I've ever witnessed in my life. So, at least they got that going for them.
At least they got that going for them, which is nice.
Yeah.
But it's just Gary Bettman being Gary Bettman, the NHL being the NHL. It's an entertaining sport, but they do things in a weird manner. Even when they were coming out with their COVID season last summer, they held their cards so close to the chest, no one knew what was going on. So I'm not necessarily surprised we don't understand what's going on with this. It's just absurd. It's just absurd.
Yeah, it's certainly weird, but let's get into our Levy Lock pick of the pod. I don't know what's better, a rain out or whatever happened in Colorado, or
Well, I got to
a
keep my money.
loss.
I
Okay,
got to
yeah,
keep my
yeah,
money.
that's true. I know what's better for the wallet. I just don't know what's better for the record book. I guess,
Well, for the
I
record
guess
book
the
and the wallet are
push.
pretty closely tied.
They are closely tied. All right, fair enough, Higgins. You go first.
All right, well, I'm going back to the MLB, talking about the Cardinals traveling to Milwaukee, and I am just going to be going with the road team. St. Louis has Jack Flaherty on the mound, facing off against Corbin Burns, who, yes, Burns is a Cy Young hopeful in the NL this season, but he is coming off of the IL for an undisclosed reason. There's rumors it might have been COVID. Who knows? If it is only COVID, hopefully he can come out and pitch rather well. If there was an undisclosed injury, though, whether it be a muscle tightness or soreness of some sort, who knows how he comes out to pitch. So that wild card potential right there has me leaning with the Cardinals. Plus, when you look at the fact that Flaherty is 6-0 on the season already and it's only May, I like what he's doing with this season. Give me the Cardinals on the money line.
I got some, at least a little bit of good news for, or I don't know if it's good news for you. Good news for your fantasy team, bad news for your bet, Higgins. If it's undisclosed, it's not injury related, so we do know that. They have to disclose
Okay.
injuries, so uh, that's why you can kind of interpret it as even though they can't say COVID,
Yeah.
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 Um, but yeah, so 100% good for the fantasy team. Maybe not so good for the bet, but might not matter. It's still tough
It'll
when
be
you're not
fine.
around your team. Exactly.
He hasn't started in 2 weeks.
Exactly. For my Levy Lock Higgins, I'm going to the Diamond as well. The Marlins take on the Diamondbacks. For some reason, this line is minus 105 each way on the money line between the Marlins and Diamondbacks. Trevor Rogers is on the mound for the Marlins. He's been unbelievable this year. Sub 2 ERA, 50 strikeouts on the year in 38 innings. He's the guy to back tomorrow night, whether it's first 5, whether it's the full game bet like me. That's the guy you want to put your money on. He's been great this year. And the Diamondbacks, Merrill Kelly is expected to start. Zach Gallen did go on the IL before Wednesday night's game, so there has been a little bit of reshuffling of the Diamondbacks pitching rotation. We'll see if Merrill Kelly is still the starter on Thursday, but right now, with that pitching matchup, to my knowledge, the Marlins have to be the side, Higgins, at minus 105 on the money line.
There you have it. 2 money line picks in the baseball. Brett, you and I have done rather well with baseball to start the season, so probably smart for us to go in that league for our locks and our pick of the pods. We'll see, though. You have a 1.5 game lead. Is that going to stay? Is there going to be another rain-out voided game that takes away that half game? Baseball might be our best route at getting those half game potentially chipped away. Who knows? Make sure to follow us on social media, though, because we're going to also have some picks through the weekend at MBB Pod on Twitter, at Next Best Bet on Instagram, and the Next Best Bet Facebook page and YouTube channel. But, Brett, before we get out of here, it looks like you have one last thing to say about the baseball.
Yeah, we'll be okay tomorrow. The Brewers play indoors, and the Arizona Diamondbacks play in Arizona. So
Yes, sir.
I think we'll be okay on the rain.
Yes, sir, we will absolutely. Who knows how we do going into the weekend, though, in terms of the weather. Make sure to follow us on the social media that I just plugged. This has been episode 140 of The Next Best Bet. For Brett, I'm Jake. We'll talk to you again after the weekend.